Alright, this is Big Boss, it's Foxhound Woods Ball, come to you from Fort Lauderdale and from my blog page over at outerheavenpaintball.blogspot.com. I'm also repping the guys from Acid Tactical, so you can check them out over at acidtactical.com. Anyway, what do you get when you take Oliver Stone's Platoon, you mix it in with Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, you trade out Americans for Soviet paratroops, and the jungles of Vietnam for the mountains of 1980s Afghanistan? You get the 2005 war movie Ninth Company. And this movie follows a group of young conscripts who are conscripted into the Soviet army to go fight the war in Afghanistan back in the 1980s. For this particular time period, it's late war period for Soviet involvement in Afghanistan. And I will say that I'll be talking about the movie from their going through training through their combat deployment. And I will say this movie is quite interesting, as it doesn't talk about anything right or wrong about the Soviet involvement in the conflict or how the Russians started in 79 with a assassination. However, I will say this is pretty much following a group of conscripts, so they may not care about the war one way or another, but regardless, I'm going to be talking about it, and you'll get some good scenes from the film, so hopefully YouTube doesn't do a channel strike against me for it. This is purely for entertainment as well as slight education, so grab your asses a bowl of popcorn and cold beer if you're able to, and enjoy.
Okay, keep in mind this movie is set in 1980s Soviet Union, and for this particular scene they're meeting their drill sergeant, and this guy they're going to learn he's not just a combat hardened veteran, but he's also got a few issues of his own. But I digress from that. Now, this is where we begin with these guys. They already had their haircuts and everything, and this is essentially the beginning of their transformation from being draftees into Soviet paratroops. And they're training in Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan. I think it's Uzbekistan. But as the thing goes on, they're going to learn how much hell they are in for. And the beginning of it is pretty much your standard fare of everything. Okay, with this particular scene, Sergeant's going up and down the troops and seeing how they are, getting to know their names, and this is where we see a glimpse of what they could expect in the Soviet military. And don't mind that this is the time when Perestroika happened. This is the time when a lot of changes were happening with the Soviet Union and the final phases of the Cold War, you might say. But one of the first things that these guys go through is a level of indoctrination. And with that being said, as far as indoctrination, they're being drilled that they're supposed to be the best of the armed forces of the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republics, or better known as the Soviet Union. And these guys came from all over, but we'll move on a little later.
What's a Soviet paratrooper? The Soviet paratrooper is the strength, beauty, and pride of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics Armed Forces! What is a Soviet paratrooper? A Soviet paratrooper is the ideal model and envy of all the good-for-nothing civilian and And what are you? We are a disgrace to the training battalion and to you personally, Comrade Drill Sergeant! About face.
One thing to know about the Soviet military as it's true today with the Russian Federation is the concept of brutal training, and I won't be surprised if this shit's going on today with the Russian Federation, but the idea is that they will beat those fucking recruits like there's no tomorrow if they screw up on something. And keep in mind, this is because the Soviet Union and today's Russian Federation, they'll take a lot of guys into their ranks through conscription. That means you got a lot of people from all over the place, and not that many of them, even by Soviet standards, weren't terribly well educated. So the idea is that they had to be brutal on some level, and with their military doctrine, it was pretty much you fight or you die. So for all these kind of scenes, by American standards, even today, this stuff wouldn't be acceptable, but keep in mind, these aren't American recruits, these are Soviet. And with that being said, things are brutal for a reason, and it becomes understandable when you understand the context of it. And this is where we see why their sergeant was made a drill instructor rather than being kept in combat. As the story progresses, we know he suffered traumatic brain injury, so they made him a drill instructor instead of letting him stay in combat. For him, it was an emotional toll. He wanted to stay in the fight, and this is essentially his breaking point, his meltdown to wanting to go back in, but they're not letting him, and he takes it out on the men in some respects.
Is there one normal human amongst you? Or are you all fucking scumbags?
War is a measure of extremes. These words were said by Black Rifle Coffee CEO Evan Hafer, who is a combat veteran, and in a lot of ways he's right. Your guys were living on the knife's edge, and either going between extreme joy, extreme sorrow, extreme error, extreme fear. All of this is shown as the movie progresses through, at this point in the movie, their deployment in Afghanistan. And with that, these guys are being thrown into a state of combat for everything from the extreme violence of it to the type of warfare it was the terrain they were operating in. And with that being said, this movie pretty much hits a lot of the right buttons in terms of cinematography, and with the good effects that they do. From my understanding, they wanted to show the realism to the war. They really wanted to show what it was like to be that kid that was in that combat zone in that particular period of time. They wanted to show how this was, in a lot of ways, Russia's Vietnam. And personally, I think they did a damn good job on it when you see it for the story, if you understand the history behind it, everything. And I will say it makes for a very good, very visceral take. It's not like a big budget Hollywood film, but when you get down to it, it didn't need to be. Just had to tell the story.
Alright. Ninth Company. Overall, this is a war movie, and albeit for a foreign-made war movie, it's pretty fucking good. I will admit, the English dub is definitely something to be desired. It's like subtitles. I've never really been a big fan of foreign-made films to a certain extent. However, the English dub does a decent job of carrying the story along and making sure things are understandable. Now, story-wise, at its core, it is a war movie, but it shows these guys going through training, going through the hell of dealing with their drill sergeant and going through their deployment in Afghanistan. They're working with the guys in their company that have been there, done that. They've all just wanting one thing: to survive, to go home. And in a way, it's like this is the universal story that is told regardless of who these soldiers were, regardless of what flag they would fight and die under. That's probably the universal thing for the average kid who finds himself in that uniform with a weapon in hand and shipped off to the fight. Special effects wise, the special effects were pretty good, all things considering. The footage, the scenes of seeing the hinds fly, it's, as far as I know, I didn't find any evidence on the making of Ninth Company, but it seems like they had a good deal of technical support, probably from veterans of the Soviet war in Afghanistan. And I don't remember at this point whether it's Ukrainian or Russian as far as the production of the film was, but they definitely had access to a good deal of Russian hardware, particularly Soviet era hardware in the form of the BMP armored personnel carriers and the Mikoyov Mi-24 Hind Ds. Other than that, the way the movie played out is very thought-provoking. You get a feel for these guys in a lot of ways. Now, ironically, well, I shouldn't really say that, but the final battle was actually based on a true event of Hill 3234, which this movie, Ninth Company, is based on. Ninth Company being that particular company of the Soviet Independent Guards Army holding a particular area to hold control of the official roads in Afghanistan at that particular point of the conflict. And as a footnote to history, the story's been talked about not just in the movie Ninth Company, but it also became a song by Swedish heavy metal band Sabaton. And yes, I will put the video for the guys in Sabaton talking about that particular song based on that battle that they did with historian Indy Nidell. Now, if you want to read my thoughts and my history explanation on this stuff, you guys could check it out over at outerheavenpaintball.blogspot.com. And don't forget, guys, if you're looking for good tactical gear for your paintball guns, airsoft guns, real steel, or just your small selection of kit in general, check out Acid Tactical over at acidtactical.com. Remember, when the shit hits the fan and you've got to trust your gear with your life, ask yourself this one question: can your gear survive the acid test? Anyway, before I sign off on this, don't forget my blog page, Outer Heaven Paintball, and my friends over at Acid Tactical have a Teespring shop. So check that out. Links will be in the description to this video. Anyway, this is Big Boss, and I am out of here.